Just give me a moment. Hello, everyone. Today we are going to begin our podcast, and it begins with talking about translational neuroscience in practice. So, today we are joined with our guest, Karima Gupta, who has a background in zoology and with a core interest in neuroscience. Karima, welcome to the show. So, the first question that I have is how do you define translational neuroscience and what makes a project truly translational to its core?
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for providing me with such an opportunity where I can share my knowledge with everyone who shares common interest in this field. Beginning for me, translational neuroscience is really about movement. About letting ideas travel across levels instead of keeping them stuck in one place. I think everyone is aware of it. Basic neuroscience helps us understand how the brain or behavior works, whereas clinical neuroscience shows us what we observe in patients. And the topic which we are going to discuss today, translational neuroscience, it exactly sits in between and asks a practical question that how does this actually help someone? Like whether the understanding of the brain or behavior or what we are observing in patients, how is it going to help in real life to make an impact or improve one's life or society. And as you asked, like what makes a project truly translational? So, according to me, what makes a project truly translational isn't the setting, it's the direction. The work is designed with the real problem in mind, not just a mechanism. And there's movement both ways. Findings from the lab should make sense in real life, and real life observation should shape how experiments are built. When that loop exists, that's when neuroscience becomes translational.
Okay, so next up, I wanted to ask where do you see biggest bottlenecks in bench to bedside pipelines? Because oftentimes this is where the last nail hits, where we cannot really justify if translational research is truly translational or not. So, can you shed some light on that?
For me, I think there are many bottlenecks, but for me, there are majorly two bottlenecks in the bench to bedside pipelines. One big bottleneck I see is that many findings work really well in controlled lab setting or an isolated environment, which is good experimentally, but struggle once they meet real life. These findings don't work well in the real life because behavior and mental health don't exist in isolation. They are shaped by context, routine, and unpredictability. Hence, when models are too simplified, they lose relevance the moment conditions change. And the second bottleneck or issue is communication. Basic scientists and clinicians often care about the same outcome. They are working on the same problem and they're concerned to make a change, but they don't always speak the same language. So findings don't move forward as easily as they could. And clinical realities don't always feed back into experimental design. Hence, these findings, since they are not communicated well, they don't make an impact or make it to the real world problem which is needed to be solved.
Yeah, so let's talk about examples, and examples meaning where behavioral neuroscience has changed a practice or a certain policy that you want to illustrate.
Okay, so one clear example comes from work on stress and learning in companion animals. As we can see, people like to keep pets as a companion animal, especially dogs, and they show significant amount of distress when they are separated from their owners. For a long time, these behaviors were treated as obedience problem, but behavioral neuroscience helped show they're actually learned stress response. They are not disobedience problem. So once that shift happened, practice changed. Training moved away from punishment and towards conditioning based approaches that focus on emotional safety. We can make a dog learn by either punishing it or rewarding it. So the shift from this punishment to this reward happened only when we became aware of this behavioral neuroscience. What made this translational was the pathway. The science was tested in a setting that looked like real life, and the outcomes were easy to understand and apply. That's when research stops staying on paper and starts shaping everyday decisions.
Right. Coming to the very last question and closing the podcast almost, I would like to ask you that how do early career researchers judge translational potential of their work? Because oftentimes we are very caught up in interdisciplinary and very cutting edge research, but it almost amounts to nothing. So, how to know about that potential?
Yes, I think that's a very interesting question, and everyone who wants to pursue or see what's the translation potential of their work must be curious about how can we start or judge whether the problem we are solving is translational or not. So I think the first question to ask is a simple one. Uh, Before starting any experiment or any work, you should ask yourself if this finding holds up, who could it realistically help? And the question itself would answer your translational potential. So, translational potential doesn't mean immediate application, which I think most of the people are confused about. That we should, if it's a translational work, it should give an immediate application, but that's not what translational potential means. It should, in fact, it means that there should be a believable path forward. Another thing to think about is how close the study is to real life. The more behavior is simplified just for convenience, the harder translational becomes. And finally, feedback matters. Talking to people who work directly with affected populations can quickly show whether a project that you're going to pursue is likely to travel beyond academia or not. So, at the end, I would like to conclude by saying for me, translational thinking is about staying connected to reality from the very beginning.
Right. Thank you so much, Garima, for joining us for this podcast, and thank you, the listeners, for listening to our podcast. That brings us to the end of this episode.